Good morning. So I'm going to give you a moment to breathe.
I'm good.
That's as a good
Oh,
host.
I was breathing in the car. And then you try to be nice and polite, and you're like, can you run this light?
Yeah. Between weather and just DC traffic, it's a wonder that we all get here.
Well, I appreciate it.
Not at all, but thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm going to jump right in. So we didn't have a chance to share this, but I feel like I've followed you around a bit. So you're from Tallahassee, Florida, born in Tallahassee, Florida. I'm a Florida State grad, undergrad.
Oh, you got to go to Florida State.
I got to go to Florida State as an undergrad. I did.
Because I was born in Tallahassee because my dad got a teaching position at Florida A&M, FAMU, and my mom, we're going back in December for graduation and stuff like that. I haven't been back since I'm 10, but she talked about the fact that they couldn't even go on the campus of Florida State.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how much has happened in that city and in the rest of the country, but I was going to engage you on that. So when you were there, you had an educator as a father and a social worker. I think your mom was a social worker.
Back then, she was teaching, they were both classically trained musicians. That's why I'm a librarian.
Okay. There we go.
By the time I was 12, we all knew I didn't have the talent, you know. It's okay. And they were very good about it and everything. But I think about them a lot in terms of, so she was piano.
Okay.
He was string and violin. And as she said, and this is for women, I always had to learn his music because she was his accompanist. Because a female African-American in the 50s, that wasn't classical pianist. There wasn't much that. So that was another little tension.
Got it.
But the thing when they got down, they were both from Middle Illinois.
Okay.
And Champaign on her
Champaign,
side, Illinois. And Springfield and part south on my dad's side.
Yeah.
And they had never seen that many professional black people before.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So when they got down there, it was like, whoa. One of the HBCUs.
Yeah. And for folks, Florida A&M is sort of on a hilltop in Tallahassee, Florida, and definitely a convener of like lots of great African-American talent back in the day, and even today. It's great school. So then you, at some stage, got to Chicago. It sounds like you had Illinois roots.
Yeah, Illinois roots. That's when we got fancy. We got to Chicago.
And then went to Roosevelt University, got your undergrad degree there, and then 2 master's degrees from University of Chicago. But then, in part of that, you became a librarian. You started kind of your career as a librarian in the system.
Accidental. Roosevelt University started by faculty members and a president of a university right after World War II that were protesting. They were protesting different things that had to do with freedom of speech. The faculty members were of different races and ethnic backgrounds, and the board of directors of the school, so they all walked out en masse.
Okay.
And Eleanor Roosevelt heard about it. And of course, Eleanor Roosevelt, she would look for things like that, and she gave them the name. And so it was public service. But that, I got there after a year of disaster. First year in college, went to a small liberal arts college, didn't work out well at all. And that's when Roosevelt was like, oh, urban area, this social justice thing, and that's how I got there and everything. So going to University of Chicago was the library part, but I got there because I thought I majored in history, political science, got, your undergrad degree, and I was thinking about law school or this or that, and my mom, I was still living at home, and she said, while you're thinking, you might need to get a job.
That sounds familiar.
Just go forth.
Yeah.
And I was going forth and trying to get in social service or whatever, and wasn't successful because I had no experience. That's why I always tell younger people, get your internships, do all that, because that counts. But I had none of that.
Yeah.
2 weeks working in, when I was, I thought that interfered with my social life. So I made 2 weeks. So I didn't have much to offer except good grades.
Good grades, which is a big deal.
Not in the work world. So anyway, so I'm going between these interviews where they're saying you got good grades, you know, nice, seem like a nice young lady, but no. And because I love books and reading and the libraries where I hang out, I would go to the Central Library in Chicago and wait for the next interview. And so someone came in who had just graduated with me and said, "Hey, Carla, are you here for the library jobs?"
Okay.
No. He said, "They're hiring anybody with a bachelor's degree." And that's a program that still goes on in libraries, library associates, where you hire people with bachelor's degrees and you hope to get them interested in the profession.
Okay.
And that's what happened to me, because I had no idea what, I went upstairs, I love books, reading.
Seemed like a
They
good
gave me
fit.
the job.
There you go. So you're working in this huge library. So I lived in Chicago for 10 years. So I'm still following you around. So they.
But not to Baltimore.
Well, not to Baltimore, but we'll come back to that.
We'll get to that.
All right. So huge library system. You're a librarian in it, right?
When
And
the libraries, I'm finding out, I'm saying,
finding out.
oh,
How was
University
it?
of Chicago.
I mean, you know, it's funny.
How did I find out?
Well, no. How was it being a librarian without all this technology in a way?
Well, we didn't know that we didn't have it. So, you know, we did what we could. This was in the 70s. I graduated, I got like from 75, but everybody can Google your age, so right now, you know how old I am. But that's another thing I tell young people, start saying 30-ish early. But that was before the internet. So 75, 77, it was all about power to the people and getting information, because libraries at that time, computers were not just starting out and they were mainframe.
Uh-huh.
And it was more of the behind the scenes types of things. It wasn't, personal computers would just get word processors. Anybody remember word processors were just starting?
Sure.
So it really was boots on the ground, as they say, with helping people find information. And that's what really appealed to me, because that whole Roosevelt public service librarian opening up this stuff for people, that's what really, and in Chicago, that was really part of the social infrastructure too, the library system there.
Right, exactly, yeah, it's sort of throughout the downtown and throughout there. So then a little short stint at University of Pittsburgh.
Yep.
PNC Bank, so Pittsburgh, I'm still
got
following along.
First I got the master's, University of Chicago, as we like to say, where fun goes to die. It's the motto of University
So I'm a
of
Northwestern
Chicago.
guy, so that's an inside joke that I love, but go ahead.
I was good to go Northwestern, but that was something. Yeah, that's inside joke, but yes, that is it. And then got the PhD, worked at Museum of Science and Industry, started their first public library service, and then went to University of Pittsburgh to teach library science.
Wow.
And that was great. I was on tenure track doing all of that. And then one of my students came back, African-American gentleman, he's doing well now, came back and he said he wanted to get in the PhD program. I said, well, why? I keep saying, Tracy, why? You're coming back. He said, well, you told me all this stuff. You all said all this stuff about you can make a difference in it. Go to your director and go to your people and tell them your ideas. And I tried that and I got rebuffed many times. So I think I'm going to come back to get my PhD. And I thought, you know what? You need to get back in the game. You're being in the academy and talking that stuff, but then what about the person that comes up to you?
On the street, in the moment, on the street,
in an organization, because that's where you might be able to do more good. And plus, I wasn't the scholar type, really.
Right. So that's a great bridge. So then back to Chicago, but this time Deputy Commissioner.
Slash Chief Librarian. That's a Chicago title.
It sure is. Of the city of Chicago. So I guess my question is, so now you're kind of like running this big show, or at least part of the team running this big show. Tell me a little bit about how being a part of that big show as a librarian influenced how you now led that big show.
And decided to make the move to Baltimore.
And the Pratt. Good,
That's where it is. So, Baltimore, Chicago, known for politics with a big P. As someone said, if you don't know anybody in Chicago in politics, that's not a good thing.
Sure.
A lot of jokes about it, but some of it's based in reality. Mm-hmm. And not having, as they say, their clout, that makes you a little vulnerable. And the position would have been to be the commissioner of the Chicago Public Library. The position I had while I was being considered for commissioner was deputy commissioner slash chief librarian, because there were laws, and the American Library Association has worked on this, that to head a library, public library system, to receive any federal funding or anything, you need a master's degree librarian operating it. So that's why they created this, because it was, the commissioner could be any person.
An appointed person.
Appointed political thing. So you had to create this other thing. So I was this other thing. And when it came time to think about where being commissioner, which is totally political, can change when the different administrations change and that. Not having clout in Chicago, I'd been there long enough to know that puts you in a different position. But still, it was home, it was that. What the people called me from Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, the first library system, public library system in the United States. I had, knew about it in librarianship. We all knew about the Pratt Library. It was where they started serving teenagers. It was the state library now in Maryland. It was this thing, and they were saying, we'd like you to bring it back.
Right, because when you came along to the Pratt, although it had a huge history,
right,
it was in a little bit of a disrepair. So
the city was, and see, you had to think about it. The fortunes of the library system or the school systems and stuff go along with the fortunes of the city. Right. So they had some difficulties, but the people in that city believed, and the state, as the state library, because half of the budget was provided by the state of Maryland to run the state services. They believed in that library system. Mm-hmm. So many people said the Pratt Library was the thing that helped them in life. So it was, and then they had a headline, and my mom loved it because she had gone into social work. Okay. Music, social. Tale of Two Cities in the Chicago papers. And she's on the bus going to work, and people are talking about, she should go, or she should stay. And my mom's like loving it. Loving it. But the people in Chicago were very supportive of me going, because they said it's like she's bucking the system. Okay. So they were supporting me going to Baltimore.
Got it. And so when you got there, you found the Pratt in some disrepair.
Yeah.
For folks not familiar with the Pratt Library system, it was built on an endowment. Through time, that endowment had gone down a bit. It was actually built with the premise of that it wouldn't be beholden to state or city funding.
Right, free of politics and religion, Mr. Pratt said.
There you go, exactly.
And Andrew Carnegie, in his Gospel of Wealth, page 26, not that I know, talks about going down to Baltimore to meet with Mr. Enoch Pratt. And he credits him, he said, this is one of the best devices for philanthropy that he had seen. And he toured Baltimore with Mr. Pratt, and in the Baltimore Sun, they said, Carnegie comes to Baltimore, and all that, because he set up this free of politics and religion.
Yeah.
the board, self-perpetuating board, not politically appointed.
Right.
And that's still, it's been challenged many times, but it still holds. And that would be a public-private partnership. So it's a 501c3.
Got
They
it.
don't need a foundation, and he set that up.
And you were able to then bring it back into sort of that prominent position.
And it was me and the people in the city, the people in the state. I've never seen such affection for a library. I mean, they've been in, Chicago, but the people didn't, get choked up about the Chicago Public Library. But they would get choked up. In fact, Congressman Cummings talked about that. Elijah Cummings talked about the Pratt Library recently, and that came up. So, yeah, people in the city really felt that.
Yeah. And so then with those accomplishments, you were kind of a natural, as I read, like a natural person to then go on and lead the American Library Association.
Well, those were my other group, my peeps,
Okay, okay.
my librarian
That's that
peeps.
national system, 64,000 librarians across the country.
Think about that. 64,000 librarians.
Yeah.
They call us feisty fighters for freedom. We were, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's very
And you were
During
the
the
chief.
Patriot Act and all that. And
I'm coming.
we spoke up.
That's right. But you challenged those folks when you took on the presidency.
Well, I had my peeps.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think when I was elected, and it was really something, to be elected by your peers and everything, and they want you to lead and do that. And then the Patriot Act, Section 215 came, and that was when librarians said, in your quest for security, and we support that, you have to think about individual rights, because people were mixing sometimes interest with intent to do something.
Yeah.
So just because, and think about all after 9/11, all the new words, and now that all the things that people were looking up, jihad or whatever. But just because you looked it up doesn't mean
You were
you
involved.
wanted to become part of it. You wanted to know, and that's what the librarians were concerned about. So when you're doing these searches on who's looking for what, be careful about that.
And so, you talked about politics with a big P. Now you're kind of on a politics with a big P stage here. So, and during that whole time, then Attorney General Ashcroft called you personally and made a promise. What promise did he make?
Well, think about this now. You're in your office, and somebody answers the phone. They say, Ashcroft is calling. So we all laughed, Yeah, right. Susie, because they had already been kind of teasing me about all this in the office, like, because I'm doing this national stuff, and they're teasing me. So we thought this was another teaser, who's next, the president? Then they called back and said he would like to speak to her at 10:18, and that's when we're like, whoa. 10:18, that sounds a little precise.
Are we sure?
Could be something real. Maybe we should take this seriously. So then it became, and then you're on the line, and it was so weird because one of the things in leadership and the whole thing of you're very conscious sometimes of what you're saying, and sometimes you make mistakes or you slip because you're trying so hard not to say the thing, and so you end up saying. So Johnny Cash had just died, and that was all in it. So I said, Secretary, we're on the line. It was like the thing from the song, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, he must think, who are these people?
Right.
But we just said, I just was able to express that being called hysteric and everything in a female-dominated profession was a little problematic.
But looking back now, almost 20 years ago, and thinking about where we live today, the fact that this political figure would pick up the phone and call someone completely on the opposite side of the issue
Yeah.
about one of his chief policies and have a conversation. And like, how important is that in this world where we vilify everything?
Well, remember though, this was pre-social media, pre-other things, so people called. They did more of that, and there wasn't, email wasn't as that, and so there was that environment. So when you look at technology as a great tool, but it also can create its own unintended consequences.
Right. But the spirit of what he wanted to do, though.
Oh, the spirit, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it had to do with the public support for the librarians. The librarians were trusted,
Okay.
and people knew that if librarians were upset about something, maybe we should look into this. Because they don't usually get upset about something. You see them on commercials for candy and stuff and getting excited because they're throw off the glasses. You know, you should get the candy. So when librarians speak up a little bit, that
It's some attention.
caught the public's attention.
Got it.
And that's what I think helped a lot.
Okay.
And then the government made adjustments in 215 and everything, and now we're very pleased that we would listen to and that those adjustments were made, and so things worked out.
That's great. So let me take you a little bit back, though. So when you took on the presidency of this organization, you kind of challenged those 64,000.
Oh, yeah, for
strong.
equity.
Yeah, before people were talking about equity,
Yeah.
you talked about equity of access. What is equity of access?
Well, we did a lot of power to the people, knowledge is power and everything, but look at our policies, fines for children. Now, a lot of libraries have cut out fines for children because in some communities, and I saw it, boots on the ground, parents in challenged communities were not letting kids get library cards because they didn't want the idea or that they might have to pay fines or the liability or that. So they had kids that couldn't get cards, and it was a protective thing, and you could understand it. So we like, look at how much money are you bringing in for those fines? Is it worth it? Charging people, especially in other challenged communities where kids are moving and they might lose the book. So now you've got this outstanding bill for, $15 book, and their card is blocked. Come on. Let's look at our policies. Let's look at equity in terms of these types of things. And so that's what I was just kind of saying.
Like,
We could do some
we could
stuff
do better.
too,
Yeah, we could do better.
and not be so rigid. Aren't you glad that the kid didn't return the book?
Right.
It doesn't mean that much. Go out and get some grant money to get more books, okay? And get out of the building and go where they are, and go to housing projects and go to that, and don't be so uptight.
Got it.
So,
And so then.
and these were my colleagues. So,
Yeah, right.
I knew the profession. I mean, and remember the reason why librarians were so tight was because back before ebooks and all of that, the book was the thing. So if it's gone, it's gone. People were pulling out, my mom even did this, she confessed later, article in an encyclopedia, people would just cut it out or tear it out.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it was gone.
It's gone.
Yeah.
So that's why librarians were, so the thing was the vehicle to carry information. So we had to protect it. That's why we had to do it. So the technology helped free the books. It's like free the information. You don't have to hold on to the thing as much.
And it was really to your point about ebooks, and I saw you asked David Rubenstein, who I've had the opportunity to interview as well, about the book's briefs, ebook versus book. So I mean that was kind of
Briefs or boxes.
Yeah.
The literary equivalent of briefs or boxes is, hardback or ebook.
Right.
He didn't know what to say.
Yeah, you took it back on that one. I will admit. So that policy actually though was kind of like even before books were,
Yes.
less important, if you will, in the equation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me take you forward a little bit. So in February 2016, President Obama, after a series of appointments, put you up for being the Librarian of Congress. So I had an opportunity, honor to interview Secretary Bunch here about a year ago.
Oh, Lonnie Bunch.
And I asked him, I said, so you were the first African-American in this position. Is that important to you? You were the first African-American and the first woman to be appointed Librarian of Congress. Is that important to you?
Oh, my goodness.
Okay.
And Dr. Lonnie Bunch, I got a chance to go to his installation as the 14th Secretary of the Smithsonian. And I'm the 14th Librarian of Congress. So, and he's been just stellar for years, and so it's wonderful to work with him now in that capacity. And being the first woman in a feminized profession was really big, because we're librarianship, education, social work, and nursing are called the feminized profession. 90% of the profession is female. The top management doesn't always reflect that.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what we say. So for the profession of librarianship, that was the big deal, that you are a woman and you do it. Personally, being the first person of color was significant for me, because I knew that people who looked like me were forbidden to read, to punish, they had all the laws. In fact, this is another mother story. Now, you'll love. So I'm getting ready for my talk at the, swearing in, and I said, you know what, I'm going to really make that point. So I'm going to look up, as a good librarian, every law on the books about slaves not being able to read. And it was a long list, and I was going to go through it, and the amputation, and the people who taught slaves to read were punished, and how many whips, and I'm going all through this, and my mom's listening. I said, Carla, that might be a downer. You only have 15 minutes. Could you kind of say there were a lot of laws that did it, and move on?
And we move on.
This it's okay. You can condense that.
Yeah.
I was going to do it. Alabama and all this. So, but that resonated, because to be the person of color with the world's largest library, this symbol for scholarship, all of this, to then be the head of it, that was something significant. Yeah. And then the first professional librarian in 70 years, since so the 14th since 1802, and then it's been 70 years. There have only been two others. I'm the third professional librarian since 1802.
Okay.
The other two were both heads of public libraries, Cleveland Public Library and Boston Public Library.
Okay. So, and forgive me, what does the Librarian of Congress do every day?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I get to, and I've started tweeting.
Okay.
So you can, they say, the young people that I work with say that it's sad to ask people to follow you. So they say that. I don't know. I think it's great. Please follow me. But they say no. So anyway, I started when I got off the stage, because I said there are 171 million items in this library. And even though I'm a librarian, I don't know all the things in there, so follow me. So every day or every other day, I post something about a treasure that's been acquired, or that they are just finished processing, or a collection, all of that. So that's been cool. So that's usually a bright part of the day. If, the Rosa Parks collection just came in.
Yeah.
Would you like to see this? And you're like, of course. Getting letters from 8-year-olds who, Sherry or something, who say, I've seen you on TV talking about this. Why can't I get a card until I'm 16?
Right.
Write me and let me know. Okay. And then budget, working with Congress, doing that, working on just the nitty-gritty part of getting our technology together.
Okay.
That's a challenge, and it was widely acknowledged that the world's largest library, that's a big haul to get all the technology going.
Yeah.
So it just varies.
It varies. So on that technology question for a second. So now, from when you started as a librarian to today, technology's just taken on, as it has in everything, right? Financial service, whatever it is. It's taken on just like a world of its own. But now it also has this sort of responsibility to not only be the repository, but frankly shape how we think about knowledge. Can you talk a little bit about how do you feel like that's going to continue?
And librarians at first, before the technology, we called it reference. We would do reference, and we had we took courses in reference because and part of it was how do you determine the best source of information? And you look at number one, authority. Is this person qualified? Somebody might have thoughts, but if you're doing a medical thing, you would look at what the National Institute of Health says about something before the person who wrote the book that's the bestseller. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're that, and so translating that, and now it's information literacy.
Yeah.
So there's basic literacy, but how do you know that what you're receiving online is accurate and up to date and all of that? So that's the challenge now, because it is hard to distinguish that New Yorker cartoon with the two dogs
Right.
sitting there and looking at the computer screen, and one says to the other, on the internet, no one knows your dog. So somebody told me lately, though, they thought that was about dating.
Oh.
See, librarians took it as information. We didn't think about online dating. We didn't. We were like, oh, that's our cartoon.
Suppose it could be either one.
Yeah, we didn't think about that until later. So that information literacy and training, like we're training kids to be safe on the internet.
Yeah. Huge.
Don't talk to strangers, but now we have to really think about also how do you know what's true on the internet, and start early with them.
So does the library system kind of have a responsibility to
Yes.
create what's true?
Well, what's accurate and authoritative.
Okay.
And you look at the websites that you subscribe to. Now, in a lot of libraries, you restrict, of course, and that's a legal requirement to get funding, and you wouldn't want to do it anyway. It's pornography. Okay. And so there are some filters that, and we had to go through, the early filters weren't as refined. Mm-hmm. So breast cancer was, in the early days of filtering, the information on breast cancer was being filtered out. So, but now the filters are much better, and you can put things, and so children's computers in libraries, you always have the screens facing a person. You do as much screening and things. So it's harder, I think, in the private realm for adults to control their young person's media input than it is in public institutions.
As a father of two teenagers, yes.
Because even if you do everything you can, you block their phone, you make them put it down before they go to bed or whatever, they can go out into the world, and there's another kid that has unlimited access. I sympathize.
It's very true. So, and you have partners in some of these big technology firms. They're not partners in my household. They're competitors in my household. And so even that distinction is.
And how do you, and sometimes you worry, and as a father of two teenagers, I think about parents a lot and caregivers, because your child there's the social pressure.
Yeah.
So if they're not doing a YouTube thing, then you have that stress in your house.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Yes.
I'll quickly.
Yeah, I want to hear.
My son's school just enacted a policy where they're going to take all the phones and put them in the office at the beginning of the day and pick them up at the end of the day. There was protests over the weekend. And imagine.
The kids.
Oh, yes, well organized. 150,
Oh, yeah.
150 middle school kids got together over the weekend and have organized a protest, and so.
Now, what's their argument? See, they have to come up with.
Their argument is privacy. Their argument is.
You're in middle school.
Argument is privacy, and their argument is safety.
See, they can get you on safety.
Yeah. And
Privacy, we can get away from.
And they called their SGA, Student Government Association representative, over the weekend and had a call about it. These are tough little kids.
Well, they're sophisticated.
Yeah.
Remember, these are digital natives.
Yeah.
They grew up with this. They know how to manipulate images. They know how to do it. They know how to get fast. They see the power of the Parkland kids.
Oh, yeah.
For good. I mean, they see the power of organizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they just need one kid that says, privacy might not be it. Safety, they're worried about that. And that's the kid that will, behind the scenes, buy stock in that kid.
Oh, boy.
That's the one.
There's a couple of them that are going to be.
That's the one that's figuring out how to get the parents, because they know you want, what if they get the text?
Well, it turns out,
Active shooter.
there's been a study on this, most of the calls that they're getting during the day are from the parents.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
so.
you can't blame the parents. You really can't. Yeah, it's hard. 10-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 8-year-olds. It's getting lower ages. So they have this device that opens up the world to them.
And
so how do you help them navigate that?
Yeah, which, by the way, as a librarian, it's got to be a bit of a dream and a nightmare to you.
Right.
Right. So.
But we see it now as another opportunity to step forward. So our new T-shirts say, librarians, the original search engines. Okay, we got bags, we got cups. Okay, we merchandising.
Yes, that's
Because
awesome.
we like, okay, who can you trust? The librarians.
That's awesome.
So we're stepping out again.
Very good. All right, so this is where I say I've got one more question, and then we're going to open it to the audience to start thinking about the questions that you'd like to ask. So you've done a lot, right? You've been in major library systems, both in Chicago and in Baltimore. You've turned around whole systems. You've led national organizations, both local and national organizations. You've been appointed by sitting presidents. So what is it that you would want your legacy to be? And do you have other worlds to conquer?
Legacy, I must tell you, in the Jefferson building, they list in marble all the librarians, the gold etches, and it's really impressive. Daniel and John and Carla at the bottom with a little dash. There's something creepy about seeing your name etched in gold in marble, and you're looking at it. So it makes you think.
Yeah.
And one of the things I hope that will go forward is the fact that that largest library in the world is the nation's library, this country's library, and we're opening it up.
Okay.
That more people will know what we have and be able to download the first photograph of Harriet Tubman. And that partnership with the new African American Museum, that's where Lonnie Bunch, we went in together because we both didn't have enough to fund, so we purchased it together so it stays in public hands.
Okay.
And that the world's largest collection of comic books is getting kids all worked up. And all of these things now people are being able to see and use and think about. And it helps local libraries because then they can connect to us. And we're telling local libraries that you don't have to do all this, connect into us.
Okay.
So I hope that that's to continue to open up this. It's amazing what this library has.
Yeah.
It really is.
Wow.
That's the real good use of the word amazing. It's a little overworked, oh, amazing dessert. Oh, amazing this, everything's amazing. But this time, you could really use it.
It's legitimate.
The contents of Abraham Lincoln's pockets the night he was assassinated. The diaries of Clara Barton that showed that she was depressed. The archive of the NAACP.
Wow.
And the Legal Defense Fund. 36 Supreme Court justices, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor and Thurgood Marshall's architects. I mean, just keep going.
Unbelievable. Thank you for that. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. All right, I'll open it up to the group. Let's go right here.
So I want to go back to something that you slid right past, which was you called out John Ashcroft for calling somebody a female.
I just mentioned it.
That's
that
so
was-
sweet. She thinks I need a microphone. And I think you also sort of joked about, telling librarians to be less uptight. I'd love for you to suck the fun out of humor and talk about kind of how you use humor as a leadership tool, particularly as someone who is in positions that women and people of color have not traditionally held. It's got to be tricky to figure out when to bring the humor and when not.
It's tricky. Some of it you have to control because I have over time developed a kind of, it's a quirky sense of humor, and part of it has to do with my background, all kinds of elements in the background, my experiences, so that by the time you get to the age I am, it's like, well, okay. People ask me about legacy, and I'm not ready to go. So you gotta, so I've gotten more confident with time to be myself. The fact that I have on dark nail polish as a woman is significant. There was a time that I thought there's a whole thing of women in leadership. That's another stream. I remember the first time I wore red nail polish in a meeting, I thought everybody was going to say, oh, she's a hussy, and what is this, and oh my God, and I just really worked myself up about it, and nobody noticed. Or if they did, it wasn't a big thing. So that humor, and over time realizing that there are times when you have to give everyone on your team or in the situation an opportunity to breathe or to realize this is not life and death. We are not in the Department of Defense. We are in a library. Now there are, let's put it in perspective. Now when you're in those situations, yes, but even then you hear them say that there are points where they have to have a little bit of levity just to release the tension, just to smooth the things out. And so that's where you learn. Your humor shouldn't be cruel to anybody. You shouldn't make fun of somebody else in the room or not in the room. Make it inclusive. Age is always a good thing. To share humor about your age or your mistakes. Talking about your own mistakes as a leader is very helpful and recognizing as a leader too that people have families. Mm-hmm. That you are getting here today with 2 teenagers and Lord knows what happened this morning. Okay, but that you're dressed here. You're not okay. That's a feat. And as a leader, sometimes we forget that those are humans. They might have a sick parent. They might have gotten some really bad news. There are all kinds of things, and that's what I've learned over time to give that. Now, I've also learned that there's a point where you have to realize when somebody might be using that, or how long do you keep giving somebody the benefit. And I have had to shorten the time that I do that over time. Because sometimes I've waited too long.
Yeah. So can you give your name and an organization?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Carly Mitchell, I'm Carly Mitchell, and my question is actually kind of about my role. So I'm a management consultant with Guidehouse, and I do strategy consulting in financial services, but I'm also the president of the Junior League of Washington, which is an all-women's organization. So I'm really curious about your role as a female leader. Because in my roles, I'm in a very male-dominated industry and leading a all-female organization, and leading 2,400 women is a lot of women. So I'm interested in your perspectives of being a female leader and how, because women particularly, we like to elbow each other out of the way. We're not necessarily always as supportive as we can be. And then in a male-dominated field, you also kind of have to get a little feisty. So I'm very curious about how your perceptions of being really a female leader, particularly when you're one of the trailblazers, particularly in your field in that regard.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mentioned the polish. I mentioned that you are hesitant sometimes to speak up in meetings, and and that part about, I don't want to lose this part, that's the age, about the women elbowing it out. When you think of that saying about, I'm the first, but I don't want to be the last, that you can climb, that you can pull with you, and that's so often because there's so few slots. We spend a lot of time trying to get in that slot and not looking at that and not realizing that it's strength in numbers when you have other people, that little more diversity rather than be the only one. And being the only one with the male dominant, so you have the female part, and just think high school. Okay? It's high school. Who's the popular one, who's the this and the that. So if you just put that on with the women, that helps. But being a woman in the male world, that's where the confidence, there's a book, The Confidence Code. You might look at it. It's having the confidence and not always calling out when you say something in a meeting. You're the only woman. You say something, and it's based on a lot of stuff. Nobody responds. They ignore you. And then 5 minutes later, John says the same thing. And you're like, whiplash. And you kind of, and I used to say, but wait, I just said that. I used to do that. Now I'm like, okay. This is what I said. This is going to happen now because everybody's doing it. I don't have to always take credit. Because what I wanted in the beginning is getting rid of everybody's all, okay, I'm glad. John, good. So it's different tactics almost. And it is tactics. There are books about strategies and things. And I would just encourage you to do that. And just have more confidence in it, because that's the whole thing. When people are underrepresented, people of color, whatever like that, one of the main things, conscious or unconscious, that people do is try to invalidate you and make you doubt yourself. So while you're sitting there doubting yourself, they're going on and everything like that. And you still worrying about, should I have said that? Was I too strident? Was I too this? And they're just like, she's sitting over there thinking, so let me
Move on.
So, yeah.
Right here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good.
Good morning, Dr. Hayden. First, I have to apologize for being late. Honestly, I have no time to be here, but I could not be here. I'm so in awe of what role you're playing, and just proud,
Well,
But and I hope you haven't already covered this, and if you have, I apologize. But you did mention what I really wanted to hear about, which was Dr. Lonnie Bunch as well. What is the collaboration? I'm so in awe of the both of you being in the positions that you are at the same time. And I just want to hear what that collaboration.
And I already apologized for being late, so don't you worry. Well, it's interesting because I knew, of course, about his career. He started out at the Smithsonian and American History Museum, went out to California, and then he went and really was more aware of him in Chicago Historical Society. And that was something to have this African-American man being so prominent there. And then his just journey, and the book is out now, his book, A Fool's Errand, I think it is, something like that. About 12 years trying to get that museum off the ground. And so the admiration you have. And then when they looked for someone to bring the Smithsonian forward. 19 museums, everybody siloed, looking at history or part of history. They looked everywhere, a worldwide search, and then they came back to, here's the person who can do it. So that's just phenomenal. And the fact that when I got here, he was already working on the museum and reached out, and I got a chance to go over and see things and before things opened. It just, that partnership that he wasn't the elbowing type, like there could be more than one black head of a major cultural institution in the city, was something. And that's that being able to collaborate that has been so important. So I'm really excited because we want to do more things with the Smithsonian. And I think we can really work on that. And the archives too, National Archive.
Yeah. Tony?
My name's Tony Cancelosi, Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind. And I don't know too many people in this room, there's some authors in this room, including myself, that you print books in Braille.
Yes.
And not too many people know that, but they should know that. What is your thoughts on a continuing accessibility for people with disabilities, but also the aging population? Because you can set the standards. Because I know there's quite a few, we deal with libraries all the time, and they are not equipped for people with disabilities.
The Library of Congress actually administers the National Library for the Blind, and it used to be physically handicapped, and now that's been changed to the blind and print disabled. So that opens up the qualifications and for people to use the services. So the Braille is still going to be a major part of the service because the blind community, National Federation for the Blind, is concerned about the disappearance of Braille with the environment. And so they are teaching Braille, and they really want that to be a basic form. What we're working on now, and there's a network of public libraries that in each state that provide those services, and the Library of Congress sends materials, is transitioning to the environment. And there's some equity issues there, especially with the internet service that you have to have in the home to receive and download. You're already dealing with a community that's challenged with some aspects, and then with the more mature person, technology might be a challenge. So now you're asking them to not just play a cassette tape or something like that, but to download and do all this. That's what we're working on now, because we know that more and more people could benefit from that service, and especially audiobooks. There already were talking books, so now it'd be nice if they could do it. So there's a lot going on with there. We're experimenting and working on that. That's a good one.
Okay.
Hi. Oh, you were right. You really do not have to hold this close to your face. My name is Karen Shepard, and as a mother of a daughter who is a voracious reader and one who, among many things, wants to become a librarian when she grows up, you speak so eloquently about sort of freeing the information and looking at the digital opportunities. What opportunities do you have as a leader to sort of address situations like we read about in Florida, where there's a commissioner who is blocking trying to block a library's digital subscription to the New York Times, for example? Is that sort of something that falls in your purview as sort of serving as that leader, or?
No, it doesn't. And what has happened is I've had to take off my American Library Association hat, being the advocate, being the leader, and put on my National Library hat. The American Library Association has a Washington office. They are on it. They are really doing a lot. They have full-time staffers, and they're working with the states, and there's a lot, and they have a advocacy day each April during National Library Week, you'll see librarians with name tags all over going to their offices and stuff. So there's a definite thing. But in my role, it's more supporting the states in terms of services, making sure that we have it and that. There are times, of course, when you're like, wow, this is an exciting time. So I keep my membership up. I'm a card carrying, but it is, I have to take off because the Library of Congress is a federal agency. It's nonpartisan. It's, that. Yeah. It's
Hi,
difficult.
I'm Alicia Tapia. I'm a director of a library in San Francisco. So I want to thank you, first of all, for inspiring me every day. I was looking at your career, and I know I kind of marked down like how long you were in each position. I was wondering, what is your reflective practice before you decide to take on a new job? Because I think for me, when I leave a library, it's like I'm leaving my community, and I want to make sure that they're taken care of, but I want to aspire to the next position. But so I was wondering what your reflective practice was.
That part you said about you want to make sure they're taken care of, it's building, as they call it, it's sometimes building a bench. Because you don't want to leave a community, and this is where I've really had to deal with it recently with the Pratt Library opening up the new thing, and you've worked on it, and everybody's talking about how wonderful they had Dan Rather the other day, and Spike Lee, and I'm sitting there going, but you want to build something that will be there if you leave. And so while you're in whatever current position you're in, think about building stuff that will survive you leaving, because you don't want it to fall if you leave. So then you'll still have pains, you'll still keep up, but you can feel good about what you built was something that's solid for the people that you've interacted with, the community people. And then, yes, aspire, because they need more people like you in other places. There are other places that need what you have done in that community. Go to some other communities. Spread those seeds around, do that. Yeah, don't feel, it's hard though, because you build those connections. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Cormiki Woodley with CLASP, and I also serve on the library board in my county, so I had to be here this morning for that. But several times you talked about equitable practices, and when I think about what the library specialists look like in my county, they're not very diverse.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about how we think about Black and brown people, people of color, and bringing them up in the profession?
One of the things I was very fortunate to be involved in with the American Library Association was an initiative called Spectrum. And I was the first chair of the committee to get underrepresented groups into the profession. And there was 4 groups at that time. And part of that was helping them get to graduate library school, because you have to have that master's in library science. And so the idea was if once a person had been admitted to library school, give the person the money, not the school, because they might need to do other things with it, and that's what did some research on that. Also, we're really challenged because people, those underrepresented groups, have so many other opportunities. If they get a bachelor's degree and they can go to different things, and there are people recruiting them, librarianship, like education and teaching, our salaries are not great. And especially when you're requiring somebody to have a master's degree. So now they've got this debt, and you're going to not pay them that well. So looking at the pay equity part, that has something to do with being a feminized profession too, so there's that. And also going where they are, going to the FAMUs, and so while I'm going to Fisk, and I was there, going and getting them, and more programs that get them at the undergraduate level so that they're not stumbling into it like I did. But you're intentional about helping them, and that's the missing part. the other thing that's interesting with hiring panels in whatever institution you're in, we have a fellowship program now with Howard University,
Okay.
a pilot with the Library of Congress. We're paid internships. Started with 3, this year is 5. We have funding from an African-American couple, the Wellborns. McDonald's owners, they're funding it. And to have them work on the archives of Jessie Norman, we just got her paper, she's a Howard grad, those NAACP papers, all of these things. Learn the archival skills, be there. What was fascinating, they're paired with department heads. And we had a closing thing where they talked about their projects. And one of the department heads said, because I know Kwame, and I had worked with Kwame, and Kwame was into, he had the dashiki, the braids, the whole thing, civil justice, all that, working on the Urban League archives. She said, when I'm on a hiring panel and I see someone that looks like Kwame, I'll think of Kwame. And everybody was like, I mean, I don't even think she realized what she was saying. However, what it did was point out that if you have experience, that's what you're going to see, not something else, but you've had experience working with somebody that looked like Kwame, or looked, and that was a good experience. So exposing the people who make these decisions and putting people on these hiring panels that'll see potential where other people might not is also important.
Okay.
Hi, good morning. I'm Lindsay Parker, and it's so wonderful to be here with you this morning. Thanks so much for your time today. I tweeted at you. My boss is
One more follower.
is Mayor Muriel Bowser, and she just appointed me to be the Chief Technology Officer for DC. And so I'm a new leader and excited to take on the role.
She's doing amazing stuff.
But one of the things that you talked about it throughout your talk today, one of the things that people ask me every day is, what's your vision? It kills me, but I'm about to push that to you.
Kill
Oh my gosh, it's killed me. But
I hate that question.
So here I go. I'm going to ask
It's
you.
like, give me a moment.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
why does it have to be my vision?
Exactly.
It could be fatal vision.
Exactly.
It could be, people always say that.
But I guess the reason I'm asking is I'm working with Rich Reyes Galavan on the MLK Library here in DC, which is going to be amazing. There's a slide. It's going to be awesome. Yeah. And so how do we get people excited about what the library is going to mean to the city in 20 years?
I was just with him and the staff at their temporary quarters, and we are going to be connecting very closely with them, and so I'll be tweeting about it. I'm going to get a hard hat tour, and so on I'm learning how you do, the retweeting, and so you go somewhere and then they connect or something. So I said, yeah, use us, because this should be, living in DC should be just the best thing ever. You've got the Smithsonian, you've got the archives, you're going to have this super duper library system. There should be some benefits to living in a city. And so we talked about your one card, having the Library of Congress card at 16, be part of that. And doing more connection. And Sherry Werb is here, so that's what you and Sherry need to get together, because I've been on Sherry about that. Like, we got to connect to DC Public. We've got to have outputs in there, and then we should let people know in the Library of Congress that here's your local library, here's the thing, push here, get the hours, do that. There should be much more. So we're working on that. But that vision thing, isn't that, And I think people, and I have learned too, that sometimes, as my mom would always say, people don't know what to say. They're just saying it because they don't know what to say.
Well, on that note, I can't let this go by without saying, Living the Dream 2015, Sherry, Perry, and Mayor Bowser.
Yay!
So really awesome.
And that's it. And that's so that's why people ask you that. That's a leading, that's a thing.
All right, we got time for one more question.
Legacy, that.
Yeah. I'm Keverick Jones. I work at PNC in real estate banking. I was curious your perspective on how people learn, given your history in the space, and to what degree technology aids and abets. Because to the conversation you guys had earlier about Richard's kids' protest, technology is really following, commercial enterprise, and so they're creating products and services, and they're selling those, and so then they tie attributes that will make those things saleable. And if you think about iPad sales, so many of them have been sold because they say this is a great device for you to, make learning more efficient for your children, et cetera. But I've read that the brain really only works in three-dimensional space, and so it's the labor of acquiring information that really makes it solid in people's minds. So I was just curious about your thoughts on this.
There's a lot of research and discussion about learning differences. I mentioned, for instance, the Library of Congress has the world's largest collection of comic books. And we just had the graphic artist, Dave Pelkey, Captain Underpants.
Yes. Yeah.
Dog Man. Bestseller. Kids line up 4 hours for this guy. He had dyslexia, ADHD, all that, and someone's realized that he was a visual learner, or he could express things visually. And so Sandra Day O'Connor, her iCivics program about teaching is a video game, because that's a way to engage. So using these tools, finding out people learn, some people are better listeners, some people get it that way, some people express it. The challenge we all have is when that child is 2 or 3, to look at them and say, so-and-so, when music comes on, they really go to town. And this one is always drawing on something. And if you could individualize learning styles earlier and channel them to kind of take advantage of those things, that would be a good thing. So technology is a tool. You see young people, they advise you now, children's hardback paper picture book sales are doing really good, because people are realizing that with reading, the whole thing is to get them on your lap and share and turn the page, not fiddle with the machine. You're doing Snowy Day with the machine, and then it goes backwards, and then the kid, and you're not getting the story. So that's where you start out with them. But it's those learning differences, and use technology as a tool, not as although I have used it as a pacifier. Candy Crush. I have grand friends. They're 10 and 9.
Yes.
And I swear I did. I said, here, you take it. And they put on all these games.
Away they went. Dr.
Thank
Hayden,
you so much.
Thank you so much.
This is so much.
It's an applause for Dr. Hayden. Thank you very much, Dr. Hayden.
Oh, thank you.
Don't forget your evaluation forms and some key takeaways, lessons learned, other than Dr. Hayden's mother is a very wise person.
She is. She just turned 88.
Anybody want to volunteer anything?
Yeah.
Come on. Yes, Charlotte.
Yeah, I would say just key takeaway is just access. Thank you, Doug. Just having access makes a huge difference. So whether it's access to books, access to leadership, access to conversations like this, just having access really makes a difference. And so access is critical across the board for everyone, because that's where you see opportunities. That's where you learn about leaders like yourself. So I'm grateful for access, and that's a key takeaway for me today.
Good. That's great.
Anybody else want to share anything? Yes.
Build a bench.
Build a bench.
Yeah.
One more. Yes, John. Humor is important in leadership.
Yeah, appropriate.
So one thing I want to add, I was helpful in getting a lot of new libraries built in Montgomery County, and we built a new library in downtown Rockville.
Oh, I know.
Which is a lovely library. It's sort of a science technology library. But when we were building it, we had a lot of library patrons, library supporters are very passionate people. When we were building it, we got all these arguments because it was in the downtown area, it was paid parking, that there was a constitutional right for free parking for libraries. So I don't know, I didn't find it in the Constitution, but they fervently believed that.
They did.
And argued that vociferously in front of us, so I just
I
want you to.
know. Well, but
So
that's
next
a
time I go to the
wonderful
Library of Congress, free parking for me, okay? Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you
Hayden.
so
Thank you all
much.
very much. You have a good evaluation forms. Thank you.
That's a lovely library.
Oh,
The Rock.
the Rockford.